Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and well, this is the Moondrop Alice. This is Moondrop's latest true wireless IEM, and it's coming to us with kind of two main features over its predecessors. Number one, the Alice is sporting the same 10mm dynamic driver that they used in their KATO IEM, which if you recall was an IEM I liked quite a bit. I gave that one 5 stars. And additionally, the Moondrop Alice has got parametric equalizer, which is basically the holy grail of equalizer control for audiophiles like this. So you can basically take that driver out of that IM that I liked as it was and tune it to however you would like. So both of those things, frankly, are pretty exciting. But if you recall, I reviewed Moondrop's last 2 true wireless IMs last year. There was the Neko Cake and the Sparks, and I didn't love them. And it didn't really have anything to do with the sound quality. It was more around the user experience, the software experience, the connectivity and the controls and stuff like that, which were frankly kind of frustrating on those products. And so I was really interested to see, going into this review with the Alice, how far have they come? And I'll just be upfront, like, they haven't done a whole lot in that department. But what we are going to talk about in this review is how I do really think the Alice is a very good sounding true wireless IEM, but also talk about the numerous ways over the past couple of weeks reviewing this that I've kind of just asked myself, like, is someone messing with me? Like, what's going on here? So yeah, like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're here now live, how's it going? Happy Sunday afternoon, evening, wherever you are. If you have any questions about the Moondrop Alice that I don't get to in this review, stick around. At the end of the review, we'll have some time for back and forth conversation. But for now, I'm just going to get through the review and then we'll do that stuff. Otherwise, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Alice for review. If you want to check out the Alice or any of the other IEMs they've got for sale, I do have a link to Shenzhen in the description down below. And with that out of the way, let's go back to the table and start talking about the physical stuff of the Alice. We'll talk about what's inside the box, the build, and then we'll get into talking about the functionality, the sound, and then how this thing compares directly with some other true wireless IEMs. Okay, packaging. It comes in a box. Cool. Oh, this is a nice looking box. We'll pretend that it didn't have that cover on the outside of it. But otherwise, what you get inside is fairly minimal, but about what you would expect. So you do get a interesting little carry case that this thing plugs into, and then kind of a little 2-piece deal like a bikini. I think that's nice, I guess, but frankly, I didn't use that at all. It makes this thing a little bit too bulky, but if you're not concerned about the bulk, it's nice that they include that because they did charge for that separately or for extra in the other Moondrop TWS. Apart from that, they also include ear tips, of course. And interestingly, the Alice actually comes with 2 different styles of ear tips. Now, I've only got 2 different pairs. They've actually got 2 full sets, so we're talking about 12 pairs of tips, but just wanted to show you these, what they look like, right? So over here on the left, we've got Moondrop's classic now spring tips, which are tips I generally like a lot, but they are a little bit on the short side. And then over here, we've got their, basically these are like soft ears tips. And this is a new style that they included with a couple of soft ear IMs, as well as with the, what am I thinking of? Why am I blanking out? The Moondrop Stellaris. And it's interesting to see that they included both of those sets here with the Alice. Apart from that, look, you get the true wireless IEMs inside the case, and that's what you get. So let's go on to moving to talking about the case. And I'll start actually by putting this in a context with the case for the Moondrop Sparks, right? This was Moondrop's original true wireless IEM, and I thought it would be worth kind of bringing them in and comparing them head to head in case you have experience with this. So head to head, the Alice case is a smidge on the taller side, and lengthwise they're about the same. But where the big differences are in 2 spots. One, the Moondrop Alice is actually significantly narrower, which is nice, but then also, and I think this is even bigger deal, the Sparks has like kind of a rubberized coating on the outside, which combined with the thick side makes this just a little bit difficult to get into and out of a pocket. The Alice, in contrast, it's got smooth plastic on the outside. It's not like a soft touch or anything like that. And in combination with the slightly slimmer side, this actually does fit a little bit better into a pocket. Now, I would say that this is still about 2 times bigger than I would like a true wireless IEM case to be. For comparison, here is a set of AirPods, and this is like the AirPods 3. You can see AirPods is still much, much smaller, but I do think that this is an improvement over the Sparks. What else can we talk about this case? There's no wireless charging on this thing, at least that I can tell. The lights did not do anything to indicate that there was wireless charging, but there are some, pretty simple lights on this thing, as you can see right here. Ignore those lights for now and just look at the lights that we see down here that kind of indicate your battery level of the charging case. Nice and simple, and again, versus the Moondrop Sparks, which is a bit of a goofy light show. I don't even know, it's not doing it. Let's do it. Let's do the goofy light show. There we go. These things look like a Christmas tree. I do think that this is an improvement here with the Alice. Anything else to talk about here with the case? I mean, I guess the last thing I'll talk about is that, like a lot of other true wireless IEMs, these things turn on and start pairing as soon as you open the case, which I actually think is nice. That just means that by the time you get these things into your ear, they're probably paired or pretty close to paired, and you don't have to wait for them. Okay, let's talk now about the earpieces, all right? Let's pull these things out, and hopefully I don't have any weird Bluetooth issues with these things playing stuff, but these are the earpieces on the Alice, and I gotta be honest, up front, these are pretty bizarre looking, okay? They are fairly lightweight, like it's a plastic, and maybe it's not obvious how big it is. I'm actually kind of afraid to pull out an AirPod because I'm pretty sure that will connect to my computer and cause havoc. But these are much larger than a typical AirPod. Yeah, I don't know. And here's the other thing. All right, let's talk about how these things fit. It took me a second. If you watch my unboxing, which I did a couple of weeks ago, it took me a second to really figure out how these things are supposed to fit, but I did figure it out. They fit like this, and it's kind of AirPods-like. But again, in case you can't tell, it's definitely quite a bit larger than an AirPod. And really the way that these things fit is all hanging on the ear canal. There's a little bit that rests here on the bottom of the concha, but you can see there's not much support in there. And there is kind of a lot of mass that just hangs on the outside of the ear. I haven't had issues with these things like falling out of my ears or anything, but I'm also not trying to do exercise or anything in them. So I would say that this is a bizarre shape. It's plenty comfortable, like there's no sharp edges or anything like that, and it doesn't feel especially large in my ear, but it also does not feel very secure. So I don't know, let's do the full head on so you can kind of get a sense for what you might look like wearing the Moondrop Alice. I don't know, a little bit on the bizarre side. Apart from just the aesthetic and the look of these things, let's talk about the function of these things because, well, they do have controls on them. And unfortunately, it is all touch controls, which, I don't know, I'm never really a big fan of. And in fact, there's a touch panel. It's either there or it's there. I think it's there, but I'm never really sure when I'm using these things. And that's kind of an issue that I have with a lot of true wireless IEMs that use touch controls, and especially here with the Alice, is that I just very accidentally trigger, pause, play, whatever, a lot of the times, inadvertently using these things, taking them out of the case, putting them on my ears. I find it frankly pretty frustrating. And even when I do want the controls to work, like because this all just feels like flat and plastic, and when this is in my ear, there's no way to discern where I'm touching, like, and this doesn't do anything, but this does do something. And if you tap the wrong direction, the wrong place, it's like, did I tap the wrong place? And then the other thing that makes that difficult to know is that there's a significant delay when you tap pause for the music to actually pause. And there's no like audible beep or anything like that to confirm the action before it takes place. So basically, it just means that these are just overall really kind of super clumsy to use in the ear. Another interesting functionality that they have in these, if you press and hold on the earpiece for 2 seconds, it switches into VDSF plus mode, which, as far as I can tell, it just basically cuts everything below 1000 hertz by a few dB. And that's, again, another thing that I was triggering by accident, somewhat often. And just, yeah, overall, frankly, a pretty clumsy touch control experience. Made them pretty frustrating to use, if I'm perfectly honest. But that's going to lead us into talking about the functionality of this thing. A number of things we'll talk about. We'll talk about like connectivity, battery life, and the app that these things come with. I'll try and give you a bit of a demo of it. Connectivity, we'll start there, okay? These do support an aptX connection, which is pretty good. They don't support LDAC, but I don't know. I don't think I care too much. I don't think I can actually hear the difference between aptX and LDAC. I said as much in my review of the Focal Batiste. I'm going to say the same here. It doesn't have LDAC, it doesn't really bother me. It does have aptX, and I think that's good. It's better than AAC and SBC, especially on Android devices. Other good things to say about the Bluetooth here is that the range is actually pretty good. This is the thing I've been concerned about with a number of, I don't know, a number of Bluetooth devices from companies that aren't Apple and Sony, etc. A lot of times the Bluetooth range is just really disappointing, and I have no issues with the range here. I wouldn't say the range on the Alice is fantastic. It's definitely not like top of the line range, but it's good enough that I have zero complaints. I was able to leave these things sitting on my couch, walk around in the living room with my phone still on the couch, and had no issues with connectivity. Other things is the Bluetooth latency on these things is actually pretty good too. I just did a quick test watching a YouTube video, and lips and stuff still seem well synced. I don't know that I would use them for gaming or anything like that, but that's kind of true of any true wireless. Honestly, the latency in these things was pretty good. But that's about going to do it for me saying good things about the Bluetooth on this set, because I had a number of issues with connectivity and just these things really kind of confusing me. Okay, maybe a boomer moment, but I don't know, man. These things drove me nuts in a number of times. So there were times when these things would boot up, they would say connected, and then immediately say disconnected, and then say connected again right after that. And I had no idea what that was going on. What I did manage to do a full reset of the product, which you can do by putting them in the case, and then you tap on the touch panel, either there or there, I forget where it's at. You tap on the touch panel 5 times, that'll do like kind of a full software reset on them. And that resolved that issue that I was having, so that was good. But there were some other times where like randomly I just like would have no music playing through it. My phone would show that they were connected to the Alice. The Alice seemed like they knew what they were doing, but no sound was coming through. Or one time randomly, the right earbud just like rebooted itself while I was listening. The left earbud continued playing music while the right earbud power cycled itself or something like that. And then when I was just ahead of this review, doing some testing on my laptop, I got them paired to my laptop, but only the left one was connected, the right one was not connected. I don't know. I don't really have these kinds of Bluetooth issues with most Bluetooth devices, but unfortunately with these, kind of with the Neko Cake and the Sparks, I had similar issues, and unfortunately we're having similar issues here with the Alice. Another thing I'll talk about while we're talking about the connectivity is that there's no like, well, there might be some beeps, but like a lot of Bluetooth devices, they'll use beeps to kind of communicate to you. And some of them will have maybe like a generic British woman voice or something like that telling you what's going on. It's kind of cool that Moondrop, they employ like their own, I think it's their VTuber that does the voiceovers, and they have that here. I think they introduced that first with the Neko Cake, and they've brought it here to the Alice. Whether or not you find it cute and fun, or you find it kind of irritating and annoying, might depend on 2 things. 1, it might depend on how old you are. And 2, it might depend on what your experience has been like with the connectivity leading up to experiencing those voices. I'll say, after struggling with the connections that I was having, I don't know, I found the voice a little bit on the irritating side. Okay, so that's the Bluetooth connectivity stuff. Let's talk quickly about battery life. And I'll say quickly because I'll be honest, I did not test the battery life on these things extensively. They claim 8 hours of battery life on just the buds, plus 40 hours additional charging on this case, which is pretty impressive. Like that's plenty. I've never worn a true wireless IEM for more than a couple hours at a time. And even then, that would be like maybe on a video call or something. So 8 hours of battery life is pretty stellar. What I will say is that I have never charged this case. So I've been using it for the past couple of weeks. I've still got about half a case charge left. So I think, my experience would definitely not undermine what Moondrop's advertising there. And so I'm pretty satisfied to say that the battery life is about as good as claimed. Okay, and then now let's talk a little bit about the application that these things use. Let me pull my phone in for comparison or for reference here. Let me get these things to pair, and we'll talk about this app that you can download. This is Moondrop Link, and I believe I've got the version that's not from the Play Store. They've got a version that you can get from the Play Store and a version that you can download and sideload into your device. I've got the side-loaded version because I think it's a little bit more up to date. But either way, probably the same function. So basically, you go in here, you pick which device you're using, and with the Alice, these are your options. Not a ton, to be honest. One, you can do some firmware updates, and in fact, you can go back to previous firmwares. At least I assume you can. You could with the Sparks. I haven't tried downgrading, but currently I'm reviewing this on the version 1.2.0. So there you go. Then the other options really just are these two right here, which are effectively EQ options. If you go into the tuning configuration option, I've got to get this into play music. It's like an interesting thing I've never experienced with other equalizers before. I think the Batiste did the same thing, but you have to have music playing in order to edit the EQ. Either way, these are your preset EQs, which I've got all of these graphed on squig.link. If you want to check it out, that's linked in the description down below. If you want to see what the frequency response is of all these, I'll say a bunch of these are frankly memes, but there are plenty of options there. But if you don't want those options, you can also go into this option, which is where it brings us to our parametric equalizer. Did this thing stop playing music? What's going on? Oh, you see, it disconnected and reconnected while I was showing you. I have no idea why. Let's go back into here and playing music. And hopefully we'll get our PEQ to show up. Please, Moondrop. Let's do it. We can do it. Si se puede. All right, we have to restart this little initialization. All right, let's go into our parametric EQ, and there are your options. So basically what you get, and why parametric EQ is so powerful, you get 5 points that you can make. Some people complain like they want 10, but honestly 5, you can do a lot of damage and a lot of good stuff with 5 options. So what you can do is you can customize the band, right? You can see this is defaulting at 32 Hertz, but if instead I want that to be adjusting at 20 Hertz, I can plug in 20 and ostensibly update that, but not working quite well right now. This is, I would say, part of the PSYOP that Moondrop is subjecting me to, but I promise you that normally does work. You can also then adjust your gain, like how much change you want this to be. So if I want a plus 5 dB, what is it? It told me I can only do minus 12 or plus 3 dB. Okay, and then you can also adjust the Q value, which is basically adjusting like how wide of a range on your frequency response it's affecting. Basically what this means is that versus your typical 5-band equalizer, you can do a lot of customization with this thing. Unfortunately, there's no like visual, as you can see, like you're just kind of doing this blind. So what I would recommend is like using a tool like SquigLink, again, linked in the description down below. Use the equalizer tool to visualize what these sort of rules are gonna be doing, and then come back here to the app, plug in the rules, and hope that the sound that you're getting at the end of it is actually matching what SquigLink was showing you. Usually it's pretty reliable. But yeah, I think that is probably going to do it for the app. Let me double check. Yeah, firmware updates. Oh, one thing that was, I guess, worth calling out is that there's no button configuration on this thing. With the Sparks, there is some button configuration. Unfortunately, here with the Alice, there is none. So you're just stuck with the default functionality, which again, I find pretty irritating. So I think that's just about going to do it in terms of the functionality stuff. And again, if you're hearing that I'm a little bit frustrated with this device, I am. But let's talk about the sound, which I think is definitely the standout aspect here on the Moondrop Alice. And we'll talk, like I typically do, start by talking about the sound signature, then what I like, what I don't like about the sound. And the sound signature part is going to be a little bit weird because, like we just talked about, it's got a bunch of equalizer options in it, and you can kind of make it sound however you want, but we'll start by talking about how it sounds stock. But even that is a little bit confusing because if you saw my initial unboxing and measurement, I unboxed it, I measured the frequency response. It looked like typical Moondrop tuning. They call it their VDSF tuning, very, very similar to Harman neutral, which is, you know, somewhat elevated upper mid-range, a little bit elevated lower treble, elevated sub bass, and then kind of like scooped out mid bass and fairly lean lower mid range. That's what I expect of Moondrop. But after doing a firmware update and then remeasuring the Alice, the frequency response that I got after that point was quite different. It was basically like closer to my neutral target, but even there a little bit lean and a little bit bright. And then, so I wasn't sure, like, is that like a glitch? Is that what's expected to be happening? Or is just like a temporary thing with this firmware? There was a new firmware, 1.2.0. I think it just came out yesterday or a couple days ago. I updated that, I remeasured that before doing the stream, and it's still measuring the same way that 0.1.9 was, which basically means that it's still measuring where the default tuning on this does not look like Moondrop's normal tuning. And I don't know whether or not to expect that going forward with past or with future firmware updates. It still feels like an accident, but that's where we're at right now. It's the stock tuning is kind of a bright neutral, very bass light. Anything else? Oh yeah, I guess which one's the right one? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out with future firmware updates. Again, there are a bunch of built-in sort of like preset equalizers in here that give you a lot of options, but like I mentioned, most of them are kind of memes. Like they're really not, I don't think anyone wants to listen to those. I'll be straight up. Like they are just like some of them just, you know, delete the bass by like 10, 20 dB. And it's like, what? That's not like a real serious pre-built-in preset EQ. There are, however, a couple of them that are pretty good. One of them they just call the in-ear target. That's basically Harman neutral, and pretty much what I did with this, given the fact that I think the default Moondrop tuning that I'm getting is not what they're intending, I just really listened to this with the default Harman tuning, and then I added in a little bit of mid bass because generally I find Harman to be a little bit too lean in the bass, or specifically the mid bass region. So that was how I listened to it. Again, the tonality is, it is what you want, right? It's got the parametric EQ in there. You can do what you want, but I don't know. All right, let's talk about what did I like about the sound here on the Moondrop Alice. And just up front, I'll say that this is technically versus something like the Sparks, a significant step up. Actually, really surprisingly decent sense of resolution for a Bluetooth device, especially good sense of even like micro contrast and texture in mid-range, which I don't really often expect in Bluetooth devices. And you can even get like a decent sense of physicality out of the bass. It's surprisingly articulate bass on this, and maybe I shouldn't be too surprised. I don't know how much to really pin on the driver that they're using, but it is using the same driver that's in the Moondrop KATO, which I think is a very, very good sounding. IEM also has really good physicality in the bass, and it's nice to see that come down here to the Alice, at least in some part. And I will say also, there's even pretty decent head stage on this set, given the tuning that I was listening to this with, which again was kind of Harman tuning with a little bit of added mid bass in there for body. So that's what I like about the sound on here. What don't I like about it? Well, I'm not going to complain about the tuning because I can make this thing sound exactly how I want in terms of tonality. That's fine. But what I am going to complain about is actually some of like the technical stuff. There's like a very, very loud noise floor on the Alice. And I'm not usually bothered by a little bit of noise floor in like my digital audio players. If there's a little bit of hiss, a little bit of background noise, it doesn't, like, usually it just disappears as soon as you start listening to music. Unfortunately, here in the Alice, the noise floor is audible even through music. Now, okay, I'm talking about during like quiet parts of music, but you're listening to music with quiet parts, you can hear the hiss of the amplifiers here on the Alice. And I don't know, I find that frankly pretty surprising on an audiophile company product, especially at $190. And additionally, that's not the only surprising thing here, is that there's also pretty audible like digital artifact sounding, like digital interference coming from specifically the left earpiece. And I think it has to do with like the Bluetooth radio talking to the phone. It's just like it makes this very audible digital crunching sound, and in combination with that very loud noise floor, make this product just feel kind of cheap to me. Again, I think it's kind of a WTF from an audio focused company, especially at this price. And I don't know, it was a big part of why, in combination with the connectivity and stuff, that I don't know, I didn't really love using the Alice. But those are my main thoughts on this thing, but we can talk a little bit about how this thing compares directly with some other true wireless IEMs. So I'm gonna pull these things in quickly and we'll do some comparisons. So we've got the Moondrop Sparks, which again, this was Moondrop's first true wireless IEM. This was 90 bucks when it first came out. The Moondrop Alice that we just talked about, 190 bucks. And then I've also brought in the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus, which I think they came out at around 150 bucks. They're basically discontinued now. I'm really just bringing these in as kind of like a reference point because the Galaxy Buds Plus are still my favorite true wireless IEM when it comes to listening to music. Okay, so I thought this would be a good reference point. So let's talk about how these things compare in terms of form factor, functionality, and sound. And we'll do this relatively briefly. Form factor, the Sparks, all right? It's got somewhat of a squat case. We already did this comparison a little bit. It's a little bit on the fat side, and it is covered in a soft touch material. It also has a bunch of goofy lights, which I'm not a big fan of, but maybe most of the point is it's just not super pocketable. In combination with the thick size and the grippy material, like it'll turn your pocket inside out when you take it in and out. The Moondrop Alice, I do think, is an improvement in that sense, in that it's a little bit thinner, a little bit narrower, and it is also a smooth, flat plastic, so it slides in and out of a pocket nice and easy, but it is still quite large. You can see here versus, you know, the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus, quite a bit larger than those, and these aren't even like the most compact true wireless IEM out there. And then finally, we'll talk about the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus. This is, you know, despite not being the smallest case out there, it is very, very pocketable. You can see a nice smooth plastic, pretty squat and flat. I don't know, I actually quite like this case, and it does also support wireless charging, which is pretty nice. Okay, so that's the form factor, at least, well, actually, let's talk about the form factor and the earpieces real quickly. The Alice is weird. The Sparks are, these are a little bit more normal looking, but they also don't really fit any better. They have somewhat long stems. Fit security on both of these is pretty weak. And then we've got the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus, which I think this is the best form factor that Samsung has done. And that's why I don't have other Samsung Galaxy Buds up here. Like, they've got newer ones out there, but the Buds Plus are still the ones that I like the best because of how well this thing fits in my ear. Very, very secure, in combination with a, you know, a nice little case that I think, again, the newer cases are a bit of a downgrade versus that one. Okay, let's talk about functionality. On the Sparks here, some plus things about the functionality here is that they don't have any, like, they're all touch controls like the others, but there's no controls on single taps, which means that it's harder to accidentally tap and accidentally trigger playback, which I think is actually one of the nice things here about the Sparks. It does also mean it's a little bit harder to purposely do those things, but that is neither here nor there. And I will also say that from memory, and I looked at my review notes as I was heading into this, I also had very similar connectivity issues here with the Sparks that I had with the Alice. Now the Alice, let's talk about these. I think the tap controls on these things are about as irritating as they get, to be honest. It's just very easy to accidentally trigger them because you can trigger them with one tap, and it's very difficult to trigger it when you want to because, well, there's nothing differentiating the active tap zones versus the dead zones, and there is like a 1 second delay between registering the tap. So like I don't know, it's just a very, very clumsy experience. And also, like we just got done talking about, really clunky connectivity issues. And then finally, let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus. These also have fairly easy to activate touch controls. They've just got a very large touch panel, but at least it's easy to find. That said, I will say once these things are in my ears, I find the touch controls in these things to be more reliable. Yeah, and then also just, it's a Samsung product, so really zero issues with connectivity. All of that clumsiness that I was talking about with the Alice, none of that here with the Galaxy Buds Plus. And now finally, let's talk about sound. We'll talk about the Sparks just briefly. Versus the Alice, these just sound like a lower technical performance. Similar stock tuning actually, but lower technical performance. Just lower resolution. There's similar issues with the noise floor and the radio noise playing in the left ear. So that'll bring us here to the Alice, which has those same noise floor and radio noise issues going on in here, but you do at least get, I'll just say it's the driver, it's giving me much better technical performance, much better sense of micro contrast through mid-range texture, and like again, articulation in the bass. It's actually really pretty well done here. And then again, the parametric EQ functionality gives you the ability to tune these things however you want. But again, most of the time I spent listening to these was just listening to basically Harman tuning. And then here with the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus, the stock tuning on these things is pretty nice. They also have some EQ options. I have not messed with them that much. I just listened to this thing stock, which is actually not too far off the Harman tuning of this because, well, Harman basically owns, or Samsung owns Harman, so they use their tuning to make these things sound Harman. But yeah, generally pretty nice. The bass on the Galaxy Buds Plus is really quite satisfying. And that's actually been like kind of the main reason I always go back to these things when it comes to listening to music. Like I still prefer my AirPods when it comes to listening to podcasts and watching YouTube, but for music specifically, this has been my go-to true wireless. And a lot of it is because of that bass quality. And I think the Alice actually beats it. I don't think. The Alice is definitely better on sound quality versus the Galaxy Buds Plus. So those are my thoughts here on the Moondrop Alice, but I do have to give it a score. Out of 5 stars, this still feels kind of terrible, but I'm gonna give it a solid 3 stars. Look, these things sound actually pretty excellent. And with the parametric EQ options in there, you can basically make these things sound however you want. But you can't get rid of the very audible noise floor, you can't get rid of the radio, and you can't solve the touch control just fiasco, the connectivity fiasco. I don't know. These things are a very frustrating product for me, honestly. Just numerous times using these things, asking myself, like, what's going on here? They do sound good. Is that enough for you? I don't know that it's enough for me to use it, but if it's enough for you and you're interested in checking out the Moondrop Alice, I do have a link in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case, sit around and watch me drink some tea, and let's have a chat.